A fish was there. Then it wasn't. 20 milliseconds. That is not an estimate. That is the documented strike window of time's Eunice aphroditois, the bobbit worm, a predator that has been living in shallow reef zones, in warm coastal waters, on sandy floors that divers cross every single day, and nobody saw it coming. Not once, not for years. The jaws are the first thing that breaks your understanding. 5 serrated mandibles, folded inward like a closing hand. When they open fast, faster than a human blink. Faster than a camera running at standard frame rate can capture as a single clean moment. Erwin Chun, documenting feeding mechanics at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in 1996, wrote it plainly. The jaws are so sharp and the attack so swift that prey are often sliced completely in half. Sliced, not grabbed, not stunned, bisected. For most of recorded marine science, nobody filmed it happening in the wild. The animal had been formally named since 1788, when Peter Simon Pallas catalogued it in vezes Nova Acta Academiae Scientiarum Imperialis Petropolitanae. Over 2 centuries of scientific literature, the behavior was known, the footage was not. Here is why that matters. A bobbit worm 3 meters long, taller than most ceilings, can compress its entire body into sediment, leaving less than 10 centimeters visible above the sand. That is the length of your index finger, pointing up, waiting. In 1993, a specimen at Japan's Miura Aquarium began attacking tankfish. Staff noticed the fish first, then they noticed what was underneath them. The pattern repeated. It would repeat again, somewhere specific, with a name, a date, a measured specimen, and a number that explains everything the footage missed. That incident is coming. The number attached to it will change how you understand every quiet stretch of reef floor you have ever seen. Here is the obvious explanation. Eunice aphroditois went unfilmed for so long because it lives in the deep ocean. Inaccessible, dark, beyond the reach of cameras. Clean, simple, wrong. The animal does not live in the deep ocean. It never did. Eunice aphroditois occupies shallow reef zones, 1 meter of water, sometimes 40, depths that recreational divers reach on a Tuesday afternoon with rented equipment and basic certification. The sandy channels where it buries itself are the same channels where underwater photographers have been shooting since the 1960s. Peter Simon Pallas formally described the species in 1788. That is older than the United States Constitution. His paper, Marina Varia Nova et Rariora, published through the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, placed the animal in the scientific record and left it there, known, named, catalogued. Museum specimen drawers across Europe held preserved examples throughout the 19th century. Handwritten labels, faded ink, Eunice aphroditois, Pallas 1788. The species was not hiding from science. Science had it in a jar. And then the 1990s arrived. Aquarium staff started noticing something wrong with their fish. The Miura Aquarium in Japan documented it in 1993, a bobbit worm in captivity, attacking and bisecting fish cleanly. Captivity, a controlled tank. That was the first documented predation record. Not a reef, a tank. Researchers had spent over 2 centuries swimming above this animal in clear, warm, sunlit water, visibility stretching 20 meters in either direction, and had never once filmed its strike. Daniel Martin at the Centre d'Estudies Avancats de Blaine spent years working through Eunice taxonomy. The morphology was documented, the distribution was documented, the behavior remained a gap. So the depth explanation fails completely. The animal was always there, accessible, shallow, known. Which forces a sharper question. If recreational divers were hovering directly above active burrows for decades, why did no one catch the strike until cameras changed? 30 frames per second. That's the standard for underwater video cameras used on reef surveys for the past 30 years. Each frame represents 33 milliseconds of time, a single blink of the shutter, a frozen slice of the world. The strike of Eunice aphroditois closes in under 20 milliseconds. Do the arithmetic. The attack begins and ends inside a single frame. Not between frames, inside one. The camera never had a chance to record what it could not separate from stillness. This is not a failure of patience or placement. Researchers positioned cameras correctly, angles were right, lighting was adequate. What they recorded frame by frame was sand. Then a puff of disturbed sand, no visible predator. Just a fish-shaped absence where a fish used to be. For decades, that gap between frames was the entire scientific record of a live ambush. The first high-speed documentation changed that. When researchers finally ran footage at frame rates capable of resolving sub-20 millisecond events, the mechanics became visible. Pharyngeal jaws inverting outward, the anterior body erupting from substrate, retraction so violent, the prey barely registers the moment of contact. Erwin Chun, documenting captive feeding behavior at Scripps in 1996, described the result. Prey sliced completely in half, the cut so clean it looked surgical. Surgical by a worm. But here the story pivots. The camera problem explains why the behavior went unfilmed in the wild. It does not explain what happened in controlled aquarium environments, places with staff, daily observation schedules, feeding logs and clear water. Newquay's Blue Reef Aquarium 2009, a public tank, coral disappearing, fish vanishing, staff running investigations for months before they found the cause. A 1-2 meter specimen burrowed so completely into the substrate that routine inspection had never once detected it. The question is no longer about cameras, it's about what a worm this large can hide from, even when humans are watching every single day. Here is what nobody expected. The predator was not hiding in a remote trench. It was not lurking beneath a seamount no diver had ever reached. It was in Newquay, Cornwall, behind glass, under fluorescent lights. Watched by schoolchildren on field trips. In early 2009, staff at the Blue Reef Aquarium noticed something wrong with their coral display tank. Chunks of coral were missing overnight, not damaged, gone. Fish were disappearing between closing time and morning rounds. The staff suspected a mantis shrimp, a known coral destroyer, fast and aggressive enough to cause exactly this kind of damage. So they set baited hooks, heavy fishing line, the kind rated for serious weight. The line came back severed, clean through, not frayed, not pulled apart, but cut with a single, precise action. That changed everything. A mantis shrimp uses a hammer strike. It does not cut. Whatever was down in that substrate was using jaws. The staff dismantled the entire tank. Every coral head lifted, every rock removed, every section of substrate excavated by hand. Buried at the bottom, coiled through the sand, was a Times Eunice aphroditois, times measuring over 1.2 meters long. It had entered the tank as a juvenile, smuggled in undetected inside a coral shipment. It had burrowed, settled, and begun hunting. For months, thousands of visitors had stood at that glass, pointed at the fish, watched the reef. Not one person had seen it move, not once. This is the shift. Every reef survey ever conducted assumes that an animal of this size in a lit, accessible, glass-walled environment could not remain invisible. That assumption held for decades. The Newquay specimen proved it wrong in the most controlled setting imaginable. But if strike speed explains the invisibility in the wild, 20 milliseconds, faster than any standard frame rate, then why did aquarium cameras, positioned inches from the substrate, also miss it completely? 20 milliseconds. Not a metaphor, not an approximation. The documented strike window of Eunice aphroditois is under 20 milliseconds, which means the entire event, from stillness to impact, completes before your nervous system has time to begin registering that anything happened. Your eye doesn't blur it, your eye misses it entirely. Standard underwater cameras record at 30 frames per second. Each frame captures 33 milliseconds of time. A bobbit worm strike fits inside a single frame with 13 milliseconds to spare. Every reef survey, every diver transect, Every hour of underwater footage shot across the past several decades produced images that were physically incapable of showing a strike event. Not because the cameras were pointed the wrong direction, because the cameras were too slow by design. This is why the behavior went undocumented for so long. Not depth, not remoteness, speed. The Nuque staff found out the hard way. Blue Reef Aquarium, 2009. Fish were vanishing. Not sick, not escaped, gone. Staff lowered fishing line to probe the substrate. The line came back bitten through, clean cuts. They began removing coral by hand, piece by piece, until they reached it. A worm over 1.2 meters long, coiled in the sand of a public display tank in a building full of people, operating on a timescale no one in that building could perceive. The worm was not hiding from them. It simply existed faster than they could see. That is the answer Chapter 1 promised. Not where it lives, how fast it moves. Every aquarium tank with a sandy substrate, every shallow reef flat surveyed by a diver with a clipboard faces the same conditions. The animal does not need darkness or depth, it needs 33 milliseconds. That is all the cover it has ever required. One specimen, Nuque, months undetected, longer than some staff rotations. That number, 1.2 meters, measured against a ruler by a marine biologist who held the photograph at arm's length and said nothing for several seconds. Some silences contain more information than most reports. If you found this fascinating, subscribe. We investigate strange, real creatures like this every single day.